and welcome to Found in Translation, a weekly-ish exploration of one fellow's translation of the Christian scriptures, one chapter at a time. I'm Brandon Rhodes, and across the internet from me is the translator himself, Brandon Velez Johnson. Hi, Brandon.
Hey, Brandon.
And our guest this week is Reverend Dr. Drew Hart, an Associate Professor of Theology at Messiah University, Director of Messiah's Thriving Together Congregations for Racial Justice program, and co-host with Jared McKenna of the amazing Inverse podcast. Hart is the author of Trouble I've Seen, Changing the Way of the Church Views Racism, Who Will Be a Witness, Igniting Activism for God's Justice, Love, and Deliverance, and most recently, Making It Plain Why We Need Anabaptism in the Black Church. Dr. Hart, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Brandon and Brandon. I'm glad to be here and to hang out with you all.
Thank you. So let's start with the book. Like, we both read your book in the last month, and you've written something really special, and I got the feeling it felt like it was something a long time coming, kind of slow cooking in you, even the way you tell the story of your own journey through church traditions. Like, can you tell the story of, like, kind of what led up to writing this book?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a really great description. I always say this has been simmering for about 2 decades. And it was kind of like, all right, it's kind of now or never. You know, it just felt like the right moment to kind of write it. And I often say I could have written I knew I was going to do an Anabaptism book, and I'll explain that in a second at some point. But the particular way that I wrote it really was because of the moment that we're in right now, and I thought how it kind of speak to some of the challenges that we're facing. So yeah, I mean, I grew up in a Black evangelical congregation. Often tell people, you know, on the spectrum of, you know, Tony Evans and Tom Skinner, for folks that know some of those names. Different than white evangelicalism, but still theologically evangelicalism, and just trying to do as much work as possible within the constraints of those theological traditions, right? And so when I went off to college and got exposed to Anabaptism, went to a school that had Anabaptist roots, it began a pretty long journey for me. I didn't immediately jump into Anabaptism, but I did begin to dialogue with it, think with it some. And then right after I graduated college, I was at a multiracial Anabaptist congregation in the city on the pastoral staff there. And so I began this 2-decade journey of either being in a multiracial Anabaptist congregation or a Black church, usually on the more Black Baptist side of things, and kind of hovering back and forth, having relationships in both. Both of these traditions have deeply shaped my own theological understanding. My relationships are still strong in both worlds. And so, yeah, I mean, I really see myself as a hybrid of these two traditions. And that's where that word Anabaptism that I threw out before, right, comes in. This idea of Black theology in the Black church, Anabaptism, and activism, and how do we bring all of that into the way of Jesus Christ in our contemporary society today. And so the book really is, I mean, it's trying to make church history accessible, and wrestling with how we got into the mess that we are, not just thinking about moral majority and things that people talk about a lot, but going back farther to think about the rise of Christendom, particularly in the West, and how that shapes so much of our Christendom mindsets that are, you know, why people want Christian nationalism today, to think about the doctrine of discovery and how the church got entangled in designing and engineering white supremacy and racism into our contemporary society today, and inviting us to really wrestle with the particularity of the way of Jesus Christ, right, as a liberating and peacemaking option on our way out to salvage the way of Jesus Christ for today. And so I really believe that it's, at least my hope is that it's a gift for the church to kind of, it's a come to Jesus moment, right, that we can rediscover the way of Jesus Christ at a time where it's really desperately needed.
Yeah, that came through really clear. Reading through it, that like there's so many different voices of the church kind of convulsing and transitioning through this sort of like really weird time that we're in, and the freshness of your voice particularly it's drawing on that Anabaptist focus on, like, let's just return this to Jesus. Like, there's all kinds of other ways that I guess more churches that more and voices that I identify more as progressive Christianity can explore how to be faithful in other ways, but just that simple returning back to, like, look, the Jesus story has always been at the margins of empire and domination. It's always been a diaspora, creative, embodied, surprising, strange faith. And so to draw those together, that voice, that center of the tradition with both Anabaptism and the Black Church experience, and saying, I think this has something really fresh and also very old to say.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I often say, in many ways, I don't feel like I do, like, there's a lot of theologians who do a lot of speculative work and constructive work. And I'm like, in some ways, like, I have something very simple to say. And it usually is going back to the very, very basics of what it means to be a Christian. Like, that's really, I think, the heart of almost all the work that I do, obviously within the context of that we're in. But I feel like that is my gift to offer the world, right? I learn and read broadly from a lot of different theologians, but, like, can we take Jesus seriously in our lives and do that in community with others, and then seek shalom for our neighbors, right? Like, it's really not that complicated for me. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the thing, right? Like, even in the passage that we're going to talk about today, it talks about being fed milk, not solid food. And, like, I think that's, you're handing the milk out there, or at least remember what it was like to drink that milk, and come back to the basics, the foundational stuff.
I'm curious, what do you hope that this book will inspire, like, white Anabaptists like me to do after reading it?
Yeah. I mean, so one of the things that people are probably surprised when they actually read the book versus what the cover does, right? Which is that neither the Anabaptist tradition nor the Black Church are just patted on the back, right? Offers some significant challenges to both. And so for white Anabaptists in particular, I do really believe that there's got to be some real reckoning with their involvement in the doctrine of discovery, right? The unfolding of the doctrine of discovery, the way that white supremacy unfolded, because it's easy for Anabaptists, for white Anabaptists, to think of themselves as outside of the problem, because, you know, like, we're not the slaveholders, right? We've got a different tradition. We rejected Christendom a long time ago, you know, and so I think there's this way in which it's easy to see oneself as outside of the problem and, like, oh, just pat ourselves on the back. And I think that what I want to invite folks to do is to tell a more honest story, a messier story that has things to celebrate, but also is confessional, right? Is honest, that laments its complicity in so much harm. And so I talk about how, you know, white Anabaptists, they weren't the ones physically forcing folks off the land, right? Indigenous folks off their lands, but they were claiming them for cents on the acre, right? While the blood was still wet on the land, on the ground. So what does it mean for that complicity and participation and benefiting off of the plunder, right, of indigenous people? Or, for the most part, they opted out of slavery. There are some exceptions, but in general, Anabaptist bodies said it was wrong. And that was something unique. That is something that I don't want to dismiss that as nothing. But they were also quietists and then benefiting off of the slave economy while not having, they were politically quietists, right, in response to what was going on. And so while there are a few individuals who became meaningful abolitionists as communities, they were the quiet of the land. And they only lobbied when it related to, like, being conscientious objectors, right, for their own rights. And so I think that there are ways in which white Anabaptists need to tell a more truthful story, repent, lament their complicity, and then make repair, right? I think that restitution, thinking about land for indigenous folks, thinking about reparations for Black folks, I think are part of the work of healing. And I think that has to be in conversation with the communities that are directly harmed. And I know there are Mennonite communities already and others that are doing some of that work. And I really appreciate when I get to see up close some of the work that's being done on the ground.
Awesome. From the other angle, I'm curious what about Black followers of Jesus who are maybe outside of Anabaptism who've read your book? Like, what would you hope for them to be curious about next?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the one big challenge that I hope people walk away with, and let me just add one thing for the Anabaptist side. So I frame, I get to frame however I want to. So I frame Anabaptist tradition broadly, and then I talk about the radical discipleship stream, right, of Anabaptism as a really meaningful stream that I think is important that all Anabaptists need to kind of lean into. And I would say the same thing. So for the Black church, everyone takes credit for slave abolitionism. Everyone takes credit for the civil rights movement, but not all Black churches were involved in those things, right? And I think it's even still common, even for some popular Black scholars, to come, oh, the Black church, just learn from the Black. Now, look, come on. I'm a child of the Black church. I know all the messiness. I know, the skeletons in the closet, and it's just not true. It's just dishonest. Yes, they were all in various ways sites for belonging for Black people in a white supremacist society and an anti-Black society. And so I do want to honor that. But not all of them embodied and are manifested the freedom struggle, right? So many of them were quietists themselves and have adopted and internalized white evangelical theologies that actually make it almost impossible for them to really truly embody the way of Jesus Christ for their neighbors and in their communities. And so I think for me, to become better students of the broader Black church, to understand where we fit in those spectrums and to take seriously the prophetic stream, I know that's been a gift for me to expand and extend my imagination of what it means to be a follower of Jesus in these trying times.
Awesome. Okay, so with this book behind you now, what's cooking in you now? Like, what are you up to next? What's got you agitated?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm always pulled in multiple directions. I mean, I think a lot of people know me people know me for different reasons, right? Some people know from my books and public speaking. I'm speaking out. I've been traveling quite a bit, not just for the new book, but just in general, a lot of stuff on reparations and all kinds of stuff. And so that's always got me going, working with actual congregations, having conversations. I love that kind of work that I get to do. But I also, behind the scenes, like I'm a professor working with students, and deeply invested in that work. Sometimes it's frustrating work, hard work, slow work. I'm at an institution where it's ecumenical, but I mean, you think about who wants to come to a Christian college right now. We have a lot of white evangelical students. And so I'm very invested in, the time that I have from the beginning of a semester to the end, and like the kind of work that I can do with students. And actually, I feel like this semester in particular has been one of the most meaningful semesters. I feel really good about the work for all three of my courses this year, of just where students started and I feel like it's very few times. I'm usually frustrated at the end because there's like one or two students. I'm like, oh man, because I just take everything personal. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like I just I got to convert them all, make them all radical. But I felt really good about all my classes and just working with students and thinking about the pedagogical process of walking with students, on-ramping them into a conversation so that they are ready and maybe best suited to and many students, when they're given the opportunity and the space to reflect, and you do it with some care, they choose Jesus, and they choose liberation and healing and humanity and compassion and justice, like many still do. It does take some work. You have to begin to understand the minefields that are there and how to engage students, because they've been so deeply socialized, deep down their instincts. And so you got to kind of understand some of those dynamics that are going on. But I've been grateful. I feel really good about teaching. My work with my local congregation, like I'm sometimes I say I'm a church theologian before I'm a public theologian. I've been highly invested in the work at my church, my local community. I'm at a multiracial Anabaptist congregation. We're in the hood in Harrisburg. Messy congregation. That's a whole conversation, but
Sure.
yeah, it's been
Always
good.
is.
We're on a good journey together. I'll share this one thing I'll say about our congregation. We adopted 4 core practices, and this will give you just a flavor of who we are as a community. And so our 4 core practices are radical discipleship to Jesus, mutual liberation and healing, decolonial and inclusive worship, and then our 4th one is pursuing shalom on the hill. Our community is called Allison Hill. That's the neighborhood. It's the poorest neighborhood in Harrisburg. And so we're pursuing shalom on the hill. And so those are the 4 core practices that anchor who we are as a community together. We're socioeconomically diverse, racially diverse. I consider myself the most justice-oriented congregation in the city. The church is like over 100 years old. We're deeply community. We have a nonprofit working with women and children experiencing homelessness. BCM Peace Ministries, like peacemaking, breaking cycles of violence with young people. Just a whole range of stuff. We're involved community organizing work I'm deeply involved in our city and stuff. And so it's just been fun, frustrating and fun to be on this journey with people, right? Who actually want to try to follow Jesus together. Yep.
Awesome. So shifting gears now before we get into 1 Corinthians, what's your journey with the Bible been like?
Yeah. I mean, the Bible has always been around. It's always been present. I grew up in a Black evangelical home, and I mean, I come from a lineage of like pastors and preachers. So like my great grandfather got saved in his 20s in Harlem and became like a church planter. My grandfather also church planted. He started like around like 10 different churches on the East Coast, mostly in the Philly area, but not exclusively. And he was my first pastor, and he was a powerful preacher, right? Like powerful preacher. And they were the Bible based, all that. So I mean, the Bible was always around. The ideas, the figures of the Bible were like family members, right? I mean, they were just like constant present, and a part of your world. And so I would say that my relationship, it's always been a significant part of my relationship, but it's definitely has gone through some transitions as well. It definitely, when I was raised, we were in a more of a inerrantist. I call it soft inerrant. Like it wasn't like hardcore, like beating people over the head with it, but it definitely, just took for granted inerrancy. And I think didn't have, I would say, a very nuanced way of thinking about how scripture is fulfilled in Jesus Christ and how to wrestle with the whole collectively together, right? And so, I mean, I think the thing that I really appreciate about my faith community is that they helped me value scripture and to want to take it very seriously. And so then when I got into more, so my undergrad, I was biblical studies major. That was my undergrad. And so it kept me leaning in, I was leaning in when it was hard, when I asked questions, when they're busting up all my preconceived notions of what the Bible was, all of that. I was leaning in because I loved scripture, and I wanted to lean in and understand what was going on. And then I had to wrestle with like, what do I do with all these contradictions? And it wasn't like the science historical stuff that was it was the ethical implications, like slavery and women in the Bible, right? Like these, like how do I read this thing when I could pluck Bible verses in different ways? So is there a faithful way for me to read the scripture? And so that was which is why I talked about like, how is this thing fulfilled in Christ, right? And what is the role of the Spirit in relationship to our reading as well, and communal readings and all that kind of stuff that I think has been really helpful for me. So that's just been the growth and transition is I think I would say is, even though I would say my community had a Jesus-centered reading, I would say I have a more Jesus-centered reading than I had before, and a Christological reading, right? All fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ in a really significant way. Yeah.
Awesome. That lineage of pastors that you come from comes through, and in addition to your years as a pastor, in the audiobook. I listened to the Making It Plain, and especially past about the halfway point of the book, I hear the preacher voice starting to break through, which I almost never hear in audiobooks. So it felt really good.
I can't help it, I guess. You sit me down with a text.
I'm glad you can't help it.
Yeah.
Well, so we're talking this week about 1 Corinthians 3 and 4 in the Liberation and Inclusion translation. That's Brandon's translation in progress, crafted with commitments to faithfulness to the text, reading with the oppressed, that God always looks like Jesus, belovedness and belonging, avoiding religious technical language, and trauma-informed results and outputs. So whether you're reading along with us on YouTube or reading it through the link in the episode notes on your podcast app, we really encourage you to follow your curiosity down into the footnotes. There's a lot of good, nerdy stuff down there that if anything seems weird, he probably talks about it down there. So go ahead, hit pause and give it a read. All right, Brandon, would you give us a reading? How far you want to read before we chat?
Yeah, let's take this first paragraph here through verse 9. Family, I could not speak to you as life-breath-filled people, but as people guided by self-preservation, as babies regarding Christ. I fed you milk, not solid food, because you were not able to take it in. In fact, you are still not able to take it in even now, since you are still guided by self-preservation. You see, where there is rivalry and contention among you, are you not walking along the ordinary human path, guided by self-preservation? When one person says, I am with Paul, but another person says, I am with Apollos, are you not walking along the ordinary human path? Who is Apollos? Who is Paul? Just as the Lord assigned them each to serve, they are servants, through whom you trusted the Lord. I planted, Apollos watered, but God was making it grow. So then, neither who planted nor who watered is what matters. God is who makes it grow. The one who plants and the one who waters are unified, and each will receive their own due payment based on their own labor. You see, we work together, and you are God's field.
I want to just begin with footnote B there. I'm used to the word flesh being there, but you got self-preservation. That seems like it might be consequential.
Yeah, maybe it's a little unfamiliar. That is one that I wrestled with for a long time as it came up in Romans and Galatians and then 1 Corinthians, and then left it as something along the lines of like bodily instincts or bodily impulses, self-preservation instincts kind of idea. But then it kept just like bothering me. That including the word body in there being too easily misconstrued as like the body is bad, right? Yeah. Embodiedness is bad. And so what I think it's talking about here, like it can sometimes just refer to like literally the stuff your bodies are made of. That's part of what sarx, the Greek word there, is. And sometimes it talks about, like we would say in English, flesh and blood. It's talking about family connection. Or even sometimes it's just kind of referring to being human. But those are all really clear what it's doing that. And these times where we talk about the flesh, kind of like capital F, like the Satan, the world, and the flesh, that kind of thrust in Paul, those are not what it's talking about. And it's talking about that posture that we all hold to some degree or another, that certain different circumstances will bring it out, even though it may not be the mode that we're in all the time, of this self-preservation, this I need to be on top here, I need to get my needs met in an immediate, short-sighted way, and I don't care who I step on to get it. That's what it's getting at. Um, and so that self-preservation felt like the most succinct way I could do. I could stick a whole paragraph in there. That's not a good idea. So self-preservation felt like the best I could come up with that would get at that without overwhelming everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How does it shift it for you?
I mean, to your point on flesh being a problematic like the legacy of that translation, of body shaming, anti-body vibes, kind of just feathering off into some sort of Gnostic kind of reading. Just getting that headwind out of the way for us being able to read without getting caught up in all that shit is really helpful. I think self-preservation, what I like about it is that so many of the things Paul is trying to argue about are things made by God for good, which get in the way, held wrongly, an unhealthy attachment in some sense, and and inhibit shalom and the way of Jesus. So self-preservation being a natural, often quite good instinct, but also like our bodies, that can also have kind of an undercurrent towards alienation and domination and scarcity. Scarcity seems to be a big piece of it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because 1 Corinthians overall is kind of about this contrast between the world's wisdom and God's wisdom. And if you keep going all the way to the end, it's these two ways of trying to acquire more life.
Yeah.
And using rivalry and contention, violence, being higher on a status and a hierarchy than other people is the world's wisdom. And God's wisdom is very different than that. It's much more about shalom, about sharing, about bringing people into fullness alongside you. In 15, it talks about the life-giving spirit or life-giving life breath. That if you're actually doing God's wisdom, you're giving life to others, not trying to hoard it for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's an interesting translation. I always struggled with, what do you do with the flesh language in the Bible, and depending on how it's being translated or how it's being employed in particular passages. But as you mentioned, like this passage, in the context of, people seeking status, people trying to climb the ladder for themselves, right? And not thinking about the well-being of others. I think that gets at some of those issues that are at stake. And I think that that's really what matters, I think, for folks to understand. Because I think about sometimes it can be overly stated, but in the Black community, sometimes people make distinctions between the civil rights generation and the hip hop generation, right? And one of the distinctions, there can be positive and negative in different directions, but one of the ways that it gets framed is that the civil rights generation was more communal minded, this liberation of community that people are working towards. And then as capitalism is seeping into some of the logics of hip hop, it's this individual rising up, right? It's like, I started from the bottom, now I'm here, right? Or, it's individualistic. And so then people can employ capitalist logics for them to escape poverty, but it's not communal. It is competitive. It's not collaborative. And so our imagination is much more hyper individualistic in that way. Yeah.
I'm curious, Dr. Hart, where do you see this self-preservation? I think Paul is showing how self-preservation, particularly in the frame of rivalry here and kind of pulling rank, is it's sort of masquerading as virtue.
Yeah.
And like, this validates my belonging or my awesomeness. I'm curious, where do you see that sort of toxic self-preservation at work, masquerading as virtue in contemporary churches, particularly around like race and nationalism? And
Yeah. I mean, I think that, I mean, because, I mean, so if they're all trying to tie themselves to Apollos or Paul for their own sake of, I mean, it's honor shame society where they're trying to validate themselves in light of that. I mean, I think that there's I mean, the brain, the synapses are firing, right, in all different directions because there's so many different examples. But I do think the celebrity culture in the church, right, the hyper celebrity culture in the church is kind of interesting, where we are grounding our sense of identity with a popular figure, right? And feeling important and validated because we feel somehow that we can claim connection to this particular person. I remember when Jared and I were doing, during the pandemic, we were not just doing inverse podcast like interviews like you all do, but like we were also doing some communal stuff, right? And people were shocked because a lot of people joined thinking like, oh, they get to hear Jared and Drew, you know, more. And it was not the Jared and Drew show at all. We actually were like on the margins, and we actually created a system in place where the entire community was sharing, breaking into groups and all kind of stuff. Some people that was transformative, other people like, this is not what I was looking for, right? But like, but I think it is so easy for folks to try to find validation in people, in political leaders and such. And so I do think that how we try to find validation for ourselves and maybe even use other people to try to move up the ladder, right? I think that we use people as a means to get what we want, right? And so it's not these authentic relationships. I mean, I always feel like, you know, I don't know, it's tough because on one hand, I'm always trying to, especially for Black folk who are coming up, like trying to create opportunities, open doors, make connections for folks who, you know, maybe want to write a book and introduce them to publishers and such like that. And on the other hand, there's folks who are out there who just want to use you, right? For their own standing, so to speak. And so it's that kind of complicated way that we relate to others. And what is the motivation? And is the motivation ultimately liberation for all, or is it, right, that kind of self-preservation and looking out for oneself?
Yeah, that return in this passage to like, look, it's all gift all the way down. Like we're all woven into this fabric of like God creating new creation, and like the way out of the rivalry is just to recognize it, how much it's just like you get to lose that ego anxiety and that instinct to really exploit others for your own self-preservation and advancements when you realize this is something that the Spirit is singing into being through us together. Like, don't you see it? We're God's field. Shift from abundance or scarcity to abundance just feels so core here.
Yeah, and it just keeps going in that. Yeah.
Brandon, did you want to? I saw in our little show notes here, you were eager to talk about rivalry versus jealousy. That's rivalry is not usually the word there.
Yeah, it's usually jealousy. It's those from zeleo, where we get the word zealous or jealous, which they rhyme in English, which is funny to me. But it's jealousy in English is too much of the like, I'm being possessive and I'm mad that you're trying to have some of what's mine. Whether that's a person or an object or whatever, which could be how it's used here, but it's not like the primary meaning of this word. Is the sense of like this really fired up, emotionally intense, competitive desire. And it's not always bad. Here it's used in the sense of rivalry. Other places it's used positively, talking about like zeal for the Lord. Um, and so that image gives me some like table flipping energy is the image that comes to mind. Um, so there is a sense of kind of coming at people, but it's what's the point? Is it to get on top, or is it to pursue liberation for all? Right. So that's what was standing out to me about the shift here and what might have been worth bringing
And
up.
I think it's a strong, I mean, it's a very helpful word in the context of this passage. I think that actually is a really great translation. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that stands out is that there's nothing here about sex, which, like, growing up purity culture, it's like anytime the word flesh came up, it was always like, yep, don't lust, don't look at porn, don't make out with your girlfriend. Right. Like, all of that is like, that's what flesh is about, right? Like, I mean, it's just, it's defining it here. You know, there are things like sexual exploitation that do get called out as part of being led by the flesh, being led by the self-preservation instinct later. But here it's naming it as rivalry and contention, like striving against each other.
Well, let's keep working our way through the chapter here.
Next section here, the end of 9 through 17. You are also God's building. Based on God's generosity given to me, I laid the foundation like an expert lead builder, but another person builds on it. Each person should pay attention to how they build on it. You see, no one can lay a different foundation from what has been laid, which is Jesus Christ. But if anyone builds on the foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, or straw, each person's work will be seen clearly. You see, the day will show its significance, because it will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test what kind of work each one is. If the work someone built remains, they will receive payment. If their work burns up, they will suffer loss. They themselves will be restored, but in this way as through fire. Don't you know that you are God's temple, and that God's life breath resides among you? If anyone ruins God's temple, God will bring that person to ruin. You see, God's temple, which you are, is sacred. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
It's interesting because, and we didn't really talk that much about the previous passage just right before, but I mean, just the analogies and metaphors that he goes through, right? So talking about almost a gardening image and then switching over to like a building and construction and the foundation of it, both for getting at this sense of, undermining the kind of rivalry that was taking place and the way that people are being put up against each other for their own sake of trying to validate themselves. And so I think this transition then to God's building and the foundation is really a neat one. And this particular passage is always striking in Anabaptist context because that it said that verse 11 was Menno Simon's favorite verse, right? In fact, many of his writings actually, before his writing, he would have that verse like there, and then he would go into his thing. And so, for him, no one can lay a different foundation for what has been laid, which is Jesus Christ, right? And so that for him is really the start. And so he would use that as a way of critiquing all the different ways that both, we could say the magisterial Reformation had other foundations that were not Jesus Christ's, and that needed to be the starting points. I think for Paul, certainly challenging that they themselves are not the foundation, right? So that literally is Jesus Christ, right? So it's just putting everything in perspective of how we work together and the significance of what we're doing, and then that we can't always test the significance of the work that we do will become clearer in the day to come, right? But not necessarily in the present. And so I think, he's undermining once again the rivalry, the way that they're being put up against each other. And it is a challenge, I think, for us as leaders, anyone that sees himself as a leader to kind of find some humility in the work that we do and not overstate our significance in the midst of God's activity and work in healing and loving and doing justice and restoring in the world.
Yeah. That's a hard place to stay, especially if you start to see some success in what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a little easier if feels like a constant struggle, but
yeah, it is. It absolutely is. And so I always tell people, like, I feel like things got more complicated for me, and I felt the tension much more when I got my PhD, like, because I'll enter into a room, and if people know I have a PhD, people will respond to you differently. It's easy when people don't know, but when people do, then it's like, and there's this, on one hand, it's like, all right, I do have some knowledge that's helpful. On the other hand, I can easily just suck up all the air in the room and play experts and shut down all the conversation. And you know what I mean? And people will play along with that game.
Yep.
And so sometimes I find myself actually doing the exact opposite, which is like really pushing back and waiting till everybody else speaks in certain spaces, right? Like sometimes I need to. And who was it? There was a SNCC worker. Was it Bob Moses? I think is the story that. So he became so influential in SNCC, and everyone looked up to him. That in their famous SNCC arguments and debates all night, sometimes he wouldn't say anything at all, because he was worried about over influencing the direction of the group. Just fascinating, right? So I always hold that as, not to say like that I don't want to disappear, but I do think we have to be aware of the space and how much influence we should have in a space. When is the time to speak? When is the time to maybe shut up and listen? And so, yeah, I don't know. I just think that's when you wrestle with all of this together and see that we're just a piece of it. We're not the foundation. We are not the thing that gives it growth. Everything's not dependent on us. God, ultimately, the Spirit of God is at work. Christ is the foundation. Let's keep that, right? And so I think those are really important challenges for, I think, all leaders.
Yeah, good word. And that having of Christ as the foundation, I love that that's where he wants to go. Like, he could have made his point by saying, like, y'all know chronology, right? Like, Jesus came first, and then Paul and Apollos. Like, he could have just, like, made that fairly uninteresting, not particularly pastoral, but objectively true clarification. He did way better, way weirder of... Like, what kind of cornerstone, what kind of foundation is it that is being laid? Like, it is the despised one. It is the crucified one who is this foundation that we are being laid upon. So why should you be, if any other person you want to claim to be the foundation like us, if there's not even a slight resemblance to that rejected cornerstone, to that despised foundation, it's a bit sus. You know, like, I think Psalm 118:22 I talk about as often as I can, because I think that logic of the stone the builder rejected has become the cornerstone. Man, if there's a couple of chapters in the Bible that really plays into that a lot, I see it through these two chapters where, like, look, you want to be pulling rank and climbing the ladder and expecting us to do that too? Like, what game are you playing? What story are you in?
Yep.
What are we trying to do here? This is like the Jesus game where there's a self-emptying for the whole, the ability to discern, as the example you gave, my privilege maybe of education may be clouding out a certain kind of hidden abundance here, and it may be healthy to adjust my presence accordingly. It shows up in all kinds of subtle ways.
Yeah. I mean, taking that into some of these passages here, I'm curious what y'all make of this language of you'll escape, but just barely through the fire, right? And if anyone ruins God's temple, God will bring that person to ruin. Like, it's feeling a little less gentle cruciform Jesus in those particular sentences there.
Right.
If you hurt one another, you're gonna, like, it. That's the hard way for you. Like, treat the temple with respect. Like, all of that sacred reverence of Zion, of the temple. If we are the temple and there's consequence for defiling the temple, then the way we treat one another, particularly across power, marginalization, and historic domination lines, whether it's race or sexuality or gender or money, class, that's a defiling of God's temple with consequence. That's the only way I can lean learningly, I think, into this like fiery vibe that Paul's giving.
And you just thinking from historic, because I imagine as he's saying this, yes, he's applying it to the people and not to a building, but because he's talking about the temple, like their mind is like, the temple is a site that is frequently targeted for destruction, right? From others. Yeah. So that's got to be playing like in their minds some, to be thinking about that kind of destruction and literally fire and destruction, completely not a stone unturned, right? And so, so I imagine that is really helpful language then for them to think about, like, what are we doing to ourselves? This is what we're doing, right? We're literally destroying the temple, and it's a sacred thing, and we're tearing it apart. So I don't know. I think the strong language is actually quite provocative in a meaningful way for them to take seriously the way that they're breaking solidarity and unity in the life of the church because of their emphases. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the way you said that made it land for me too. Like, he's not talking about, at least not here, he's not talking about outsiders targeting the church. He's talking about people within the church targeting others within the church.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Ready for the next section?
Yeah.
Okay. No one should deceive themselves. If someone among you seems to be wise according to the standard of this age, they should embrace supposed nonsense so that they can become truly wise. You see, the wisdom of this world system is nonsense with God. As it is written, God holds the seemingly wise tightly in their false wisdom. And again, the Lord knows the deliberations of the supposedly wise, that they are useless. So then, no one should boast about human leaders. You see, everything is yours, whether it's Paul or Apollos or Cephas, or whether it's the whole world, or life or death, or it's the present or the future. Everything is yours. You are Christ's, and Christ is God's.
Yeah, obviously, echoing back to where he began, obviously, I'm guessing the previous episode. But 1 Corinthians 18, right? The crucified Christ that reveals the power and the wisdom of God. And it really does. Because for Paul, it's like they're going after, I don't know, the false imitation, right? Like you've got acts. I don't know what would be I don't know how old y'all are. I'm dating myself a little bit. When I was in elementary school, the big thing was we used to have Tiger Electronics. You guys know what those are?
Oh yeah, we're in our early 40s. That
right? Yeah, okay, early 40s. All right, great. All right, we're on page here then. All right, so for listeners who are a little bit younger, it's these like little handheld games. You put a little 2 AA batteries in there, and it's like the most simplest graphics you can imagine, but it was very exciting at that time before like Game Boy.
It was mind-blowing.
Yeah, it was mind-blowing. It was big. It was a big deal, but it'd be like running to that when you have like a PS5 right beside you, like what are you doing, like, or and so what we think is wisdom of this age, it is useless. It's ridiculous when you begin to see things from the vantage point of the crucified Christ, right? Which is really a great reversal of all that is going on. And to see God at work from the margins and from the edges and cracks of society. It puts things in a very different perspective. So it is the great reversals that Jesus was always teaching himself that is at work here, but in terms of epistemology, right? How we know what we know, whose vantage point, whose stories do we hold, right? Whose wisdom do we carry with us? And what is unveiling that wisdom for the world? Anyway, so I think that is still really meaningful. And then to lean into that, which then helps us see, like, you're worried about, who you belong to try to validate yourselves. And like in Christ, like it's all been given in the life of the church, in the body of Christ, in the life of what God has done, all these gifts to share together in community. Right. And so it's like, so much more, so much bigger is available to you if you could only see with new eyes what God has generously offered in the community of creation.
Yeah, that final stretch there, 21 through 23, of like, look, it's this like gracious, ludicrous abundance. Like, look, what I'm trying to help you see is like this dumb ladder game, man. Like it's Jesus is doing some cool shit all over the place, and you are totally part of it. So chill out about this stuff.
Right.
It takes the anxiety of the ego out of it. It can.
Yeah. Reading this, it brought to mind like Genesis 3 too, like the lies that the serpent was telling Eve of like, then you'll be like God. Talking to the person who was literally made in the image of God and had stewardship over all creation already. It's like, what more do you need to be like God? Like, you already have it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what is being said here, is essentially that same idea. Like, why are you trying to like get more than you already have? You already have everything.
Yeah.
Well, let's turn the page to chapter 4, shall we?
So, instead of all that, a person should think of it this way. You are like Christ's assistants and God's stewards over the mysteries. In that context, the only thing that is sought in stewards is that they would be found to be faithful. So, to me, that makes it a small thing that I'm investigated by you or by those enacting any human day. In fact, I don't even investigate myself. You see, I'm not aware of anything against myself. However, that's not why I have been found to be just. The one who investigates me is the Lord. So then, don't settle on a judgment about anything before the right time, until the Lord comes, when he will illuminate the things hidden in darkness and clearly show the intentions of hearts. That's when there will be approval for each person from God.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it's like a third. I mean, this one is a little bit less like in your face, but so you had the gardening, the building, but then now this being a steward. And at least from a couple commentaries I had read, like the idea of the steward, like the household manager, basically, oftentimes like it's a dual thing, because it's someone that's in some ways is responsible and in charge of things, but often was an enslaved person that was actually carrying it out. And so, I mean, this is a striking way of kind of disrupting some of the rivalry and strivings and the status games that everyone is playing, using that language to describe his own work, right? Yeah, he has this responsibility, but he's a servant and he's a steward of the house, of the mysteries of God, right? Of watching over what God has done through the crucified Christ. And so I think that, I don't know, I think those three, the gardening, the house, the construction, this house manager and steward, like, this is really brilliant, I think, analogies that are just busting up all their preconceived notions and ideologies and ways that kind of Roman honor system kind of had people striving and competing against one another. I think they're brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is really that upside down logic with Corinth being probably the most wealthy and Romanized city
Yeah.
of all the audiences in the New Testament.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, well, except for maybe Rome, I suppose. But yeah. But yeah, it's like you guys are going to have to maybe do some extra work to get what's at here than, say, the people of Judea who are in occupied territory.
Yeah. I'm going to come at it 3 different ways, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Let me reinforce this again.
Yes, that's right.
And just seeing how those 3 stack, it also is loosely chronological to the Hebrew story, moving from garden to temple to kind of stewarding the story. But it also, all 3 of those are kind of 3 sides of the same story in Genesis, where the opening creation hymn is God establishing the cosmos as a temple.
Right.
And there's all these temple parallels in both creation stories, and establishing these icons, these image bearers who have that kind of stewardy role. So he is just sort of walking around like, you want to talk about foundation? Let's go back to the first story and draw on those images. However, I guess he's riffing really hard on them.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that I had not put together, but you're right. It's all garden and temple imagery with literally the word for image of God. We like image better because it doesn't sound as bad. It's the same word that gets translated as idol.
Yeah.
We are the idols of God.
Yep.
And then this here, talking about being stewards, as we were made stewards over creation.
I want to hear a bit about, like, you've got this like capitalized D day. Like, you don't often pull that sort of typographic trick. What? Explain yourself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's used the word day in this very particular way twice already in chapter 1 and in the last chapter that we just read. And then here it's doing the same thing that it's kind of doing with like world's wisdom and God wisdom, or supposed nonsense and true wisdom, where it's using the same word, but clearly like, and this one's the counterfeit. Right. So the first 2 are about the day where God makes something really stark and shocking, really shakes things up for justice. And here it's typically translated court, but it's not the Greek word for court. It's not talking about court. It has nothing to do with court. It is the word for day, and it is not, there is judgment in the sense of like something cataclysmic happening, but not in like a judge is presiding over proceedings sort of way. And so like a human day of judgment would be, some big examples are like Nero's persecution of Christians in Rome, the destruction of the temple in AD 70, Nazis committing genocide in the Holocaust, all sorts of stuff like that. And on a smaller scale, walking into a synagogue and trying to kill a lot of people. Like, that's a human day, where there's this decisive act that's trying to consolidate power by harming others. Right. And it's very much the opposite of the day of the Lord, where it's a decisive act that's bringing about justice for those who have been harmed and targeted by humans.
Like, that's where this rivalry goes.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, what, it's like the first line in the Didache, like the first like discipleship manual of the church that we have is like, there's a path that leads to life and there's a path that leads to death.
Yeah. And he's, by using it in this sentence, like he is, calling out the Corinthians here as like, you trying to like investigate me and make me look bad, or like trying to like see if you can find any skeletons in my closet. Like, I mean, fine, do that. I don't care. But you're trying to go on that side. You're trying to get power by doing that. You're not actually trying to find justice. You're trying to gain your own power. Now, family, I adapted these things for myself and Apollos for you, so that you could learn through us to apply the saying, not beyond what is written, to avoid you being self-important, each over the other. Who is distinguishing between you? What do you have that you didn't receive? And if you received it, why do you boast about it as if it weren't received? You've already had your needs satisfied. You've already been enriched. Without us, you became royalty. I wish you had literally become royalty so that we could reign alongside you. You see, I think God distinguished us, the latest commissioned ones, as doomed to die, because we have become a spectacle to the world system, and to messengers, and to people. We are considered nonsensical because of Christ, but you are savvy regarding Christ. We are powerless, but you are powerful. You are held in high esteem, but we are not treated with value. Even now we are hungry and thirsty, insufficiently clothed, beaten up, and homeless. We exhaust ourselves, working with our own hands. When we are verbally abused, we respond with well wishes. When we are harassed, we stand tall. When people speak badly about us, we are supportive to them. We have come to be treated like garbage by the world, treated by everyone like we're scum, even now.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a powerful passage again, and it's striking again, given that he's wrestling with people who are, as we've been talking about, doing all the status games, climbing the ladder, trying to be somebody within the Roman system and all of that. And like, it's kind of a gut punch a little bit, right? Like, I mean, he centers, like, we've become a spectacle to the world system and to messengers and to people, right? That their lives, they've been the conquered, the ones who are about to be crucified. They're the scum, the disposable of the worlds, right? The mistreated.
Right.
They are literally the wretched of the earth, if we use Howard Thurman's language, right? With their backs against the wall. And so he's like praising them. And in some ways you're like, is he being sarcastic or not sarcastic? Because you could read it either way.
What's going on?
I'm curious your thought. I mean, I read him as being a little sarcastic, but I don't know. But you could read it either way, I think. But either way, it definitely is disrupting their sense of importance and the ladder climbing and all of that. I mean, that's it is the great reversal again that exposes their own intentions, their own goals, their own values, and the way that they're trying to participate in the very system that literally is crushing them, the apostles and those that are doing that work. And so I don't know, I think it's brilliant, and it echoes again 1 Corinthians 18, right? God has chosen the weak to shame the strong, and all of that as well. So
yeah, I'm reading it alongside with you as sarcastic. I think when he says what he really means is where he calls himself important. Both at the beginning of this paragraph and in the next paragraph. So he's like, oh, this is how you see yourself as royalty.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
I know that there are some, even biblical scholars, who read this and don't think he's being sarcastic. I know, or there's a split, I guess, but
sure.
I think they're wrong, but I could be wrong. So who knows?
Yeah, same. Yeah.
I mean, man, this is a radical discipleship kind of tentpole of like, count the cost in some sense. Like, this is the foundation that's been laid. Like God's royalty, God's capstone or cornerstone of the temple that's being built is despised of this world and is going to be hard. And that doesn't mean every time somebody like dislikes Christianity and you get to have some sort of like victim martyr complex that like Christian nationalists often do, but like you're going to come up against a very fundamental energy of humanity, of scarcity and power and control and division.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's going to make you maybe not have enough clothes, maybe beaten up, maybe homeless, maybe thirsty, maybe pepper sprayed outside of an ice building.
And in some way, he's kind of saying, and that kind of almost doesn't matter in a sense. Like, he's not trying to convince the world to stop being the world.
Right.
Like, he's like, the world's going to do what it's going to do. Netanyahu's going to do what he's going to do. Trump is going to do what Trump is going to do. Why are you mimicking them?
Right.
Stop it.
Yeah. Yeah, he doesn't want to, he's not trying to persuade the world to stop being the world. He's trying to persuade the church to be the church.
Yeah. All right. Let's hit this last
Bring us home.
section here. Okay. I'm not writing these things to shame you, but rather to counsel you as my beloved children. You see, while you may have countless people who take responsibility to guide you regarding Christ, you don't have many fathers, because I became your father regarding Christ Jesus through the triumphant message. Therefore, I encourage you to imitate me. That's why I sent you Timothy, who is my beloved and faithful child regarding the Lord. He will remind you of my paths, which are according to the standard of Christ, just like I teach everywhere throughout the whole called community. Some of you are self-important, as if I weren't coming, but I will come to you soon, if the Lord is willing, and I will get to know not only what the self-important people are saying, but also what power they have. You see, God's reign isn't about words, but about power. Which power do you want? Should I come to you with a royal scepter, or with love and a gentle life breath?
Yeah, so we have another image here as father. And I did have a question. So this was the one I was curious about, your royal. I didn't read I've read some of your other choices. The royal scepter. What was your logic for royal scepter? Because I do have how I read that passage. The stick made sense to me, but I'm curious the thoughts behind that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a more broad term that can be used for a lot of things, including like a staff and a scepter, and it does seem like it's meant to be a symbol of status and power. And so you could think like Moses' staff kind of thing, as the leader of the people. So royal scepter is just one of the things this word could be used for, and it seemed appropriate to me in the context here.
Okay. Because I've always read it in the context of like father, children, and then like discipline, like he's threatening. I could come to you with a big stick, or I could come to you the gentle in the way of the kingdom, right? Like that's like the way the world's stick. But I see that too. I guess
that makes sense.
That makes sense. So it's different ways of reading that. That's interesting. But I do think overall, I mean, it's interesting that he claims father, like, even though before he's like, oh, we're all working together, he's like, but don't forget who your daddy is, right? So like, I'm the daddy here. Before we go, let's just keep that clear.
That's right.
But which is funny, but he wants to remind that relationship that is there, that initiated that whole process for them. It is important, right? And I think that's on a relational level, like we do remember the people that walked us and mentored us in the faith in really meaningful ways. And so,
and you want good things for the people that you have mentored, that you care about. Like my professor, when I was in my counseling program during the internship, she referred to our like internship cohort as like her chicklets, right? And there's this affectionate, like, you're mine, you're my little ones that I'm rearing up, and I care that how you're doing and that you succeed, and that it doesn't like crush you, the weight of all this, like, and I'm going to hold you to the standard of ethics and doing your job well, and like all of that. Like, and I think that's what's happening here. He's like, I'm calling you out, but it's not to make you like hate yourself or feel bad. It's because I want the best things for you. And that's the point of all of this.
And then he's like, and I'm going to send Timothy. He's like, and what I've been teaching to everyone, everywhere, in the standard, right, which is the way of Jesus Christ, will be reminded to you once again, so you can get in line.
That's right. Yep.
I'm not playing favorites with the kids. I'm trying to be even and say it to everybody. And to just bridge those two different ways of hearing the like father and then down there with the royal scepter thing, like they're in the Roman Empire with the paterfamilias, like the pattern of kind of father overall is Caesar.
Yep.
So there is a like father language has this, to me, morbid sense that it ultimately derives from the guy with the army.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of both.
Yeah. Father was a term for Caesar as well.
Yeah.
So many of the terms that we use for, this isn't about Jesus, but this is about Paul, but like Lord and Savior and right. Son of God, all of those are Caesar terms.
Yep.
So that's that logic of, okay, well, this is how we normally think of the person in that role. Let's turn it upside down.
Right. Mm-hmm. That's what I was saying. We have to think, like even with language, kingdom of God, right? Like it's an anti-kingdom kingdom. And if we think of all those different terms as being subverted and that they must now reflect something different, a different reality behind them, right? Mm-hmm. And if we miss that and just try to reduplicate the imperial logic, which is clearly what the Corinthian church is doing, right? They're reduplicating or taking for granted what is the norm for their society already, then you miss the inbreaking of what God is trying to do in communities. Yeah.
You see that showing up very clearly in like the Christian nationalist movement in the United States, but it happens in all of our groups, like
spaces.
Because it's that self-preservation instinct that we all have, right? And so it's, if we need to consistently work to remind ourselves, okay, do the opposite.
And we need folks who are willing to, and you need someone who will name that in community, and communities that are receptive to that kind of accountability, that we're going to live this out together, right? And that we're not afraid to name the ways that we are. So I talked about in our community, like I mentioned, like the core practice of mutual healing and liberation. Like that was specific to us naming that paternalism was a reoccurring role for some of our members, right? Like, because we have some folks who are educated, wealthier, white, whatever, and see themselves as givers and helpers, right? And servants, right? That they saw themselves as having everything to give and nothing to receive. And so in some ways, in many Anabaptist communities, like that can be a way in which they also still are playing the hierarchy game, right? And self-preservation, all this stuff. And so, I think all those different dynamics, we all got to figure out what specifically, how does it show up in our community, and how do we actually be accountable so we actually are co-workers, that we actually are on the same team, working, building together, pouring, planting, all the different language, right, that is used for a healthy community that is actually liberating and healing together.
That feels like a really great sentiment to conclude this episode on. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I want to say that the easiest way for everybody watching and listening to support Found in Translation is to leave us a rating or review on whatever app or player you've been enjoying it on. It makes it easier for other people to find the show. You can find us on Facebook as Found in Translation. You can read the Liberation and Inclusion Translation at www.litbible.net. And follow its developments with Brandon Velez Johnson on Threads as @lit.bible and on Blue Sky as @litbible.net. And read more of his work at litbible.net/articles. You can follow me on Threads as @BDRhodes. Dr. Hart, what's the best way for people to connect with you and your work?
My main 3 solo books are all available through Herald Press. So that's Trouble I've Seen, Who Will Be a Witness and Making It Plain. I also do have a co-edited book called Reparations and the Theological Disciplines. You can find that anywhere books are sold as well. It's a more academic book. You can find me on all the socials, Instagram, all the different places, Facebook and stuff. I get Drew Hart, DRUHART for a handle. Yeah.
Awesome. The music you're listening to is by Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com. Founding Translation was produced on the ancestral lands of the Chinook and Kalapuya people. Goodbye, Brandon.
Bye, Brandon.
Bye, Dr. Hart.
See you, Brandon and Brandon.
Bye, everybody.